What's happening, guys? Miami here with JST, and I'm at the beautiful Wade studio with none other than Andrew Wade himself. Today, we are going to be talking about the differences between using expensive studio gear and just sticking to the world of plugins. Is it possible for you to compete with the major labels and the major studios just being on a computer and downloading software? What is your stance on hardware, man?
So I remember even back in the day, a lot of people would be like, the equipment doesn't matter. I remember hearing that a lot, even like at the beginning of like when plugins were becoming decent back in the early 2000s. But like being a smaller guy, like it's empowering to think that. But as I have changed gear out and gotten more gear and tried different things, that becomes a little further from the truth.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like there are certain thresholds for this, though.
And then what gear matters?
Exactly.
Not if it matters.
Right.
What gear matters?
Right, exactly. If I don't feel like a piece of gear is adding to my sound and actually improving something, I just don't keep it.
No.
I just get rid of it. I'm not a gear hoarder. One of the biggest things that a lot of people overlook, the interface.
Yeah.
The interface is huge. There's a lot of people that would use, I'm actually not super up to date with this, but the Scarletts were very popular for a while.
2i2 gang, I was with you.
I have one in the other room. But a lot of the cheaper interfaces, what you'll run into is the gain won't be able to go low enough sometimes. Like if you have an active guitar or a guitar with like really hot pickups, it'll just be clipping the whole time. That's not you, that's not the guitar, that's the interface. And you won't be able to get that down unless you have an outboard piece of gear like a pad. And you can buy something like for 15 bucks to add that pad. However, you're also going to run into the same problem with microphones, condensers especially. I feel like if you don't know that information, you're going to compensate for it in another way. Like maybe you're going to back further away from the mic, and now you have more room sound. So there's like, you might be compensating for your bad interfaces and you're making the wrong choices for the wrong reason and not realizing it's not you.
Yeah.
It's not the microphone. It's the interface, which is, I feel like, is probably the last thing you would think. I'm turning this all the way down. I mean, this clearly must be the quietest anything can get, but it's still clipping.
When I come to thinking about interfaces, I just kind of think of the mentality of an all-in-one solution that when people get into the mindset of, oh, I want something that does all the things that I need in one, that it's going to be compensating somewhere if it's not super expensive. If this interface is $200 and it has a preamp inside of it, and it has a pad inside of it, and it has
all the converters.
Yeah, every conversions in there, ADD, like all of it's in this one little thing, versus somebody that's using a preamp that by itself is $1,000 or $2,000.
Right.
Obviously, that's not going to have the same result. Like you'll be able to use that thing, but it's not gonna sound as good because it doesn't have a proprietary job.
Yeah.
It's like focusing on too many things and they're trying to smash it into this cost-effective thing.
I like to use compression on the way in when I'm doing vocals.
Yeah. And
when you actually are doing compression on the way in, you kind of have to be in a different category of equipment anyway, including the interface, because you also need that preamp to power the microphone.
That's correct.
There are some compressors, that have the preamp built into it, but like a distressor, for instance, very popular.
Yeah.
1176, they don't have the preamp built into it. So what I've noticed is whenever I'm compressing on the way in, and then I do all my in the box, I'll do extra compression as well after that. There are no rules.
Yeah.
Compress as much as you want if it sounds good. But I will notice that, especially with the distressor, that if I had the exact same vocalist on the same mic, but I didn't compress on the way in, or I get a source from somebody else, like a vocal recording from somebody else, I feel like it doesn't matter how much stuff I put on it, something's missing. I don't know what it is.
Even if I send a vocal that wasn't in a compressor, or like going to a compressor and I send it back into it after the fact, something is still missing. And I chalk it up to, I was singing a certain way because the compressor was on, and then I wasn't singing that way when it wasn't on.
Could be, yeah.
But I don't know how else to quantify that or what else I think it is.
The easiest way that I can quantify that is, at least what I hear as a problem, is the vocals don't sound as like even across the board. They don't sound as consistent for some reason.
Yeah.
Like I almost can tell in the box like where it's being compressed. I don't know how else to explain it.
I know what you're talking about.
And that's one of those things that you don't realize is making a massive difference, especially like when there are records that you look up to and sounds that you've heard before, and you're like, man, I'm trying everything, but I'm not getting that sound. As soon as you get that piece of gear, it's like a light switch. It's like, this is that sound.
I felt like that when I got a specific microphone.
What microphone was it for you?
The Telefunken AK-47. Now I've had a bunch of other microphones that were cheaper priced, before that, because I really didn't have the budget. I'll tell you, actually, the real moment that I knew, I was at a Clear Lake studio in LA. I was doing a demonstration over there for their whole studio. And I stepped in that booth and they had a 251 in this like perfect booth going into a 1073 and a CL1B. I stood in there, I sang, I was like, hello. I'm like looking around, I'm like, what is that? What am I hearing? I'm like, oh, that's me. And when the door opened, you could hear a fly on the wall in the other room. Like it was like the crazy thing. I was like, dude, how hard is this compressing right now, or what's going on? But I felt like for the first time I heard my actual voice in a microphone. It was a really weird feeling.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, so this is how people must feel when they feel like, oh, I found the mic for me, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was like, I feel like I've never sang before until right now. And when I sang in there, I feel like I sang the best that I ever sang in my life.
Dude, that is a very, very real thing. So your environment, and that includes the gear, will make you feel a different way about what you're doing. Like, I'm doing this, and this thing is the best thing, and so that means I have to reflect that.
Yeah.
I have to be my best self. I have to be the best sounding I can be, because if I don't sound right through this piece of gear, I am the problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You can eliminate all the other factors. I felt that same way when I got my Sony C800, or when I used the C800 for the first time. There's like that certain top end sheen that no matter what other microphones I used, I had used the C800, then I went back to like a U87, and I was like, man, this sounds so weird, because it's like a lot darker, but it has like the high mid presence boost, which the C800 almost, I think it's more flat, but it feels scooped in that area.
Yeah.
Because the U87 is so different. And no matter what processing I did or high-end excitement I did on that microphone, it never felt like the C800.
Bro, I have a similar thing. My friend Ivan was recording this person I had like sent to him, and he was using a C800 or something like that. So no, it was a C800, and he records through it with his CL1B and his 1073. Like I had like a 1073 and a CL1B or whatever, but I didn't have that microphone. And when he sent the vocal back to me, I was like, were you high passing? He's like, no. I'm like sitting here on my 1073. I'm trying to match the vocal, like as close as I can. So you remember the Chandler Germanium tone controls?
Yeah.
I'm like using that in conjunction, like just trying to get that same high end sheen that was on there and remove I couldn't do it.
And the dynamics from it as well are going to feel a lot different. Because let's say, for instance, you are using, like the best way to get, in my opinion, to get high end is not just EQ, it's like a little bit of excitement, which is like harmonic distortion.
Yeah.
And that changes the dynamics. And you know what I mean? And the microphone, the analog harmonic distortion that's on that microphone, or whatever's actually capturing that high end, that's going to be a totally different dynamic range, and the way that those dynamics feel coming straight from your mouth. One is like you trying to add it in where it doesn't really exist. And the other one is like that was always there coming from your mouth, and it has captured it. Going down this huge rabbit hole with getting cheaper microphones that were still good, $200 to $500 range. A lot of them felt the same, but again, I have the C800 and nothing is close.
If tracking with compression on the way in is super important, you're using a distressor. I do the same. What's a cheaper alternative somebody could use?
Cheaper would probably be like the 500 series rack type gear. Honestly, haven't dove into that a lot, but all those modules are cheaper. I actually don't know of one, because in my opinion, I've even used, like the CL1B, I'm gonna get hate for this, CL1B 1176, some of those other compressors that are nicer, and I just haven't liked it as much for a final sounding vocal as a distressor. So if you're talking cheaper to get the similar result, I'm not too sure, which is to me a testament of the gear making the difference.
Yeah.
And that's the whole topic.
Like, I've been using a distressor on vocals ever since, like, Eric Valentine basically just had a rack of these, and he's like, yeah, it's like, this is what I use. Best sounding thing I can use for it. But I have access to anything that I could ever want, but this is what I use. I'm like, yeah, if Eric Valentine's doing that, like, somebody that sits there and just tweaks all day long and he's come to that conclusion, I don't need to waste my time sitting in a room for 4 months trying to figure out which one's better, because he already did it for me. And I trust what he's saying in that scenario. Like, I'm not saying you should just do that all the time, but Eric,
there is a reason.
Yeah.
Like, he has chosen that.
Yeah, over and over and over again.
And like I will tell you this firsthand, it is an expensive journey to go down.
Yeah.
If you don't trust that person, you know what I mean? Like
100%.
It's like you buy the gear, you return it, or you keep it, and you're comparing. I don't know.
I was doing the 1176 into the two-way thing, and then the reverse version of that, using a distressor, then like a bunch of other different compressors. And what I came to the realization was, like, why do I have all this shit? You know what I mean? Like, why am I spending so much money on this? And I had like racks of things, and it was almost like a CLA-ish setup where it's like, okay, that's my snare compressor, and I'm just leaving that there. All right, that's my kick compressor, I'm leaving that there. I had a pair of distressors that was just for kick and snare, and then like something else that was just for overhead. And I'm like, yo, I'm not even in a price tier to where I should have gear like this and be doing this kind of thing. It doesn't make any sense. It's like I'm making good money from doing what I'm doing, but not enough to justify having a $2,000 compressor that's there for when someone goes. Distressor was extremely utilitarian. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Sure.
It covered all the bases of what I needed.
Oh, yeah. Another massive thing for me that was an aha moment is guitars. So much of the sound of the guitar comes from that DI, and I feel like people just maybe don't realize that. And I kind of didn't either. I thought with enough tweaking of the DI, you could make a guitar basically sound like another guitar. But as soon as you get your hands on the guitar that is meant for the vibe that you're looking for, you know, like P90s and Les Paul, for instance, it's like there's just a totally different sound than like Aftermath, like Bare Knuckles or something like that. You will never make this guitar sound like that guitar, no matter how much distortion you put on it, no matter how many pedals you have on it. Yeah.
Pickups are everything.
They're not going to sound the same. And sometimes it'll drive you crazy trying to find the right tone, going over amps and cabs and all this other shit, when your problem is you are not using the right guitar. You're not using the right pickups, you know what I mean? And the more guitars you use, the more you realize, oh, this is that sound. Oh, this is that sound. Yeah. You know what I mean?
When I plugged in a Jazzmaster that had like 1965 like OG pickups, and I like played it for 5 seconds, I was like, this is exactly what I've been trying to get the sound of. And also amps that are like that. So there's like, I think it's like a 1964 blonde Fender Bassman amp, like, you know, like the Blondie one that has like the matching cab.
Yeah.
That amplifier, I don't care about any other like amp from that era when it comes to this breakup sound that I hear in my head. That is exactly what I heard over and over again in the tone that I was chasing.
Right.
And I cannot get that sound from any other amplifier.
Yeah.
No matter what I try. I did some deep digging, because when you go down the tone rabbit hole, you start being like, yo, like, what is it? But what was the speakers on it? What was whatever? It's just the factory speakers that it had. And I was like, why do I like this so much? So I started looking for bands that use that. And I was like, it's like, that's one of my favorites. That's that amplifier.
Yeah.
Then even the main, I was talking about it, Am I Pretty? I want to actually pull this up really quick. Listen to this guitar tone. I mean, I don't know if you're gonna care as much as I care about this, but.
Yeah, that definitely is a specific sound that you like. You're not gonna grab a Stratocaster and find that sound.
Exactly. It's like, I'm not gonna get that from a Les Paul. I'm not gonna get it from anything other than also a Fender amp either. I tried kind of getting it with a specific orange amp that kind of brought me in that realm, but it's a little bit more fizzy. than it is like clean and striking like that. I was like, dude, that is like one of my favorite sounds.
There is another one I think might be an unlikely problem for some people, and it is the monitors. I'm sure you hear over and over again, if it sounds good on a small speaker, it sounds good everywhere. Not quite true. Not quite true. But there is some merit to that. Like, if you have a small, like, Bose speaker or something like that, that does have a little bit of a bass response, it should sound big on that. However, if you just have, like, you know, some tiny little KRKs or something that are, like, low wattage, you're not going to get the right dynamic response from those speakers, especially when you turn them up. They're going to start limiting on you without you knowing that is happening. So you're going to be hearing limiting added to your mixes, and it will be very frustrating for you whenever you're comparing your mixes on another stereo, because all of a sudden it's like, I didn't know this thing was so loud. I didn't know this thing was so quiet. I had a lower wattage version of these speakers. These are the BM6As Mark II. Not super expensive, but they've done me well. They've served the purpose for a long time. I had the BM5As, which were a lower wattage version of these, and they basically sound the same, except it's the lower wattage, and they start limiting automatically. It's not the safety limiting feature. It's just the nature of the speaker. It just starts limiting when you try to hear it at louder volumes. And I didn't know that. As soon as I put these on, I'm like, my mixes sound like they're 3D. Things are a lot punchier. You can turn these up, and as soon as you hear what a mix sounds like when it's loud out of nice speakers with a good dynamic response, it feels very different than a bad mix. And that's going to be something that's going to be highlighted for you when you do have the right monitors, like nicer monitors. So like you can get kind of far with like KRKs, for instance, or just a smaller. I do have the Atoms as well. They're kind of the same. But you do need eventually somewhere in your chain somehow to be able to monitor on something that you can actually hear things loudly with a good dynamic range. And that also includes a subwoofer. Because, for instance, when you do bring it to something that is a super nice sound system, the low end should be responding exactly as you want it to respond. And if you can't monitor that correctly, you'll never know what's going on down there. You'll hear like the lower mids, and that's about as low as you can get. But when you can actually really hear that low end, you can shape it exactly as you want. I feel like you can get kind of nitty gritty. Like for instance, having outboard EQs, they're a lot more dynamic sounding. When I am tracking drums live, like if I want the snare drum to have more body in it, I can dial in 200. And this EQ versus any EQ I've tried on the computer, even dialing in the same settings, EQ matching, any EQ that is like close to this style, it just doesn't have the same feel. So, and the difference is very obvious. It makes it sound like I've added body mainly to the transients, but any of the bleed or like ghost notes don't really get that huge boost of like 200 that a regular EQ would do. So like it maintains, or sometimes it makes it feel like I have more dynamics than I did before using this EQ. That's kind of nitty gritty. I feel like, for instance, there's a lot of sample replacement today anyway. Depending on what genre you do and what path that you want to take, that's something I feel like you can take it or leave it. But that to me is not replaceable as far as what that does for me with a live sound.
I think transient response is a huge thing when it comes to dealing with different types of EQs, but with preamps in general. One thing that I've noticed is the big preamps that we always talk about, like SSL, API, Neve, they have a different transient response to them. And because they have a different transient response, it always makes me wonder, is this the reason why things sound better on consoles? Because all your tracks have the same transient response now.
Right.
Versus having like an API with like a punchy, like snappy, like transient response versus like a Neve, which has a different one.
Yeah.
And then you have an SSL, which is more just like neutraled out. And when you go into most studios, they're using different preamps on everything. And if you are using something like a console, I think that contributes to having that big sound that people are used to.
And I was chatting with Jason Livermore from the Blasting Room.
Yeah.
They are the ones that got me onto these, the UTA MPEQs, just the UTA preamps in general. They have their massive SSL. They have a few in the building, but he was talking about, like, you know, they're gearheads and they're going through gear left and right all the time.
Yeah.
They have so many of these because he's like, these absolutely smoke the SSL preamps and stuff. He's like, these are absolutely just the best overall preamps that you can buy. Those are like the aha moments. And that's why I say I only keep the gear that to me has made a huge difference, because A, I don't want to have a ton of gear that I'm just sitting around collecting dust that I'm not using. And B, you know, I just want to stand behind everything that I have. I like to feel, you know, true to my methods and myself, and why do you do this?
It's crazy because you can sit here and talk about this kind of stuff forever, and I think that's kind of why I chose to sit here and talk about somebody that I've looked up to for a really long time. You can empty out your bank account messing around with gear, or you can take it from the people that have spent all that time and all their money figuring out the answers for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he's done it to a big extent. Like, I've done it. Man, like I said, I have a rack of 8 SSL EQs, 8 SSL compressors, whatever. It's like, I don't even track drums anymore. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, if anybody wants to trade for something,
let me know in the comments.
Yeah, let me know in the comments. Like we said though, if you're an engineer on the come up, give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. You only have to do it one time, and tap that bell for notification, so when a video drops, you know the location. And until next time, my friends, we will catch you later.